Research is all around us. Newspapers, television, magazines. And let's look at 3 examples. Patients' depression improved 10 to 20% with meditation, a result comparable to the use of antidepressants. This is from The Week last April. Nutrition. New science reveals fat isn't what's hurting our health. Time magazine. Survey suggests Arlingtonians like pricey nuptials. Sun Gazette, October 30th. What I'd like to talk to you about today is threats to validity, and I based this on this is my ancient book, Experimental and Quasi-Experimental Designs for Research by Campbell and Stanley. How many of you have heard of this book? Oh, good, at least one person. And my husband, of course, Irwin, yes. Okay, well, I've based my talk on this book. It's a classic from 1963, but I got to tell you, if you go on the internet today and Google threats to validity, you'll still come up with professors at universities that are teaching this stuff. It's amazing. It's just so helpful in that for looking at research. They divide their types of validity into internal and external. Internal validity is inside the research, how you do the study. Are you using appropriate methods? You know, have you selected your research subjects appropriately? Are you doing your analysis correctly? Did the patients really do all that meditation that they were supposed to do, or were they sitting there thinking about something else? Were the survey questions really measuring what they were supposed to measure? Did they include all the wedding costs, or did they just include, some of them? Did the respondents answer all the questions in the survey, or did they get tired and just stop halfway through? These are some of the internal validity issues. External validity. This is the simple one. It's generalizability. Are these results of the research representative of other populations and other settings? We know that some of the early research that was done on heart disease was just done with men. Is that generalizable to women? We know that lots of research is done with college students. I don't know if you want to plan your lifestyle based on college students. I had one study, I was so excited about the findings, and then I looked at the details, and it turned out it was done with 17 German college students. So that was a setting that I'm not sure generalized to me. So let's practice these 2 concepts with a research study on toothbrushing. This is from 2003, and these researchers concluded that brushing immediately after consuming acidic beverages, in this case orange juice, should be avoided. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up some of the details of the research, and I would like the audience to tell me, is it internal or external validity? Okay, question 1. The study design involved 15 healthy volunteers. Is that internal validity or external validity? External, because there may be some unhealthy people out there, and we'd have very different results if we used them. The study was a single-blind, randomized, notice the British spellings of the British study, 5-treatment crossover design. Is that internal validity or external validity? Internal. Okay, very good. Okay, the specimen treatment regimens were drinking water and brushing with toothpaste A, drinking water and brushing with toothpaste B, just drinking orange juice and brushing with toothpaste A, drinking orange juice and brushing with toothpaste B. So you've got 5 different things that these folks are doing. Okay, is that internal validity or external validity? Internal. Very good. Okay. The drinks were consumed as 250 milliliters over 10 minutes, brushing ex vivo for 1 minute to each specimen. Okay, now I looked up ex vivo on the internet. It seems what they actually did with this study is they put denture plates in the one material in the upper one and one in the lower one. They had the people drink the stuff, then they took the dentures out and they brushed them with a toothbrushing machine. So that's the ex vivo part, was because it was out of their body. So do you think that would be internal or external validity to criticize whether this was the right approach or not?
Sounds external.
I think internal, but it could be external too. I think sometimes they can be a little bit of both.
Generalizability of doing it.
Right. The generalizability of the setting, for example, is this really going to apply to people who brush their own teeth? Maybe not. Okay, so question 5. Measurement of tissue loss was made on days 5 and 10 of each period using a, I don't know how you say this, profilometer? Profilometer, thank you. Internal or external validity?
Internal.
I say internal. Question 6, now these were the results. The dentine at day 10, many specimens exceeded the 50 micron set limit of the profilometer, and only day 5 data were considered. So they were only able to use half of their data. Is that internal or external validity? Well, again, I'd say it could be both. You have a problem with losing the 5-day data. I'd call that internal validity because they screwed up the research. But it's also external validity because I'm not sure I want to change my toothbrushing habits based on this research. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the individual threats to internal validity. Campbell and Stanley came up with a whole set of these, and I just love the names that he gave to them. It just makes it so much more fun to look at research. And you know, over the last 40 years, I guess, since grad school, I still use some of these terms when I look at the research. Let's see, there's 7 threats to internal validity and 4 to external validity. And we'll do the external validity later, and those are much easier, by the way. And again, you can Google these and learn more about them. Okay, I'm just going to quickly run through the names just to show you how cute they are. History, maturation, testing, instrumentation, statistical regression, that one's a little scary, selection, and mortality. So the first threat we're going to talk about is history. And this is the idea of some historical thing happening in the middle of your study. You were doing something looking at your favorite comedian, and then all of a sudden Bill Cosby hits the paper, and that may affect who people think their favorite comedian is. Maybe you're looking at race relations, and the Ferguson, Missouri stuff happens in the middle of your research. So the people who were treated in your research before versus after these events, they might give different answers. So this is the history effect. 2 of the things that really bother me about nutrition studies is there can be history effects, like when USDA issues a new food pyramid, Starbucks adds calorie counters to their pastries. I mean, there's all types of things that can be history effects. Okay, the next one is maturation. And this is the passage of time causing changes during the research period. And Campbell and Stanley actually have these great examples. People grow older, they grow hungrier with the passage of time, they become more tired. But they may, so things can get worse over time, but things can also get better. People got more rest, healing, they became more mature over time. So depending on how long the research lasts, you could have some of these maturation effects. This is one reason I think that the placebo effect can work. There was a study that was issued last summer looking at Tylenol, and they had half the people taking Tylenol for back pain and half the people taking a placebo for back pain. And after about 2.5 weeks, they both were better. Well, did the Tylenol work and the placebo work too? Or did neither one really do anything? Because people just get better after 2.5 weeks when they have back pain. I always joke that that's one reason my dermatologist won't put you right in to see her. She waits about 6 weeks for the next appointment, so that probably your skin condition went away in that 6 weeks. Testing. Okay, testing. Once you've taken a test, you often do better on the second test. Even things like blood pressure, medical things. Like, I'm sure all of you have had that experience where you've gone to the doctor and you've had high blood pressure and they said, oh, well, let's wait a minute, take it again, and it typically goes down. Also, things like taking the SAT test. The first time you take it, you haven't quite figured out how to do it. The second time you take it, scores may go up. This is another problem with things like research with diaries. Once you're writing down, once you eat every day, you may either start getting tired of it and quit writing down as much, and so forth. Okay, so that's testing. Instrumentation. This is changes in the measurement that you're using, particularly with the observers who take the measurements. This can be a big problem. And this is also called instrument decay. Now, I've got some examples for this one. For the first one, the instrument changes over time. It can lose its calibration. It starts performing poorly due to low batteries. I mean, physical instruments can be problems. And then the other thing is with the observers, perhaps they're doing some kind of a grading, and it may, as they grade more and more essays, trying to see what they're like, their standards may change. They may decide they were being too harsh with the first ones, and the later ones they're more generous, or vice versa. So this is instrumentation. Is the instrument, can it be affecting the quality of your research because things can change? One thing in survey research, if you have poorly trained interviewers who are not, using the same methods with every respondent, this could affect the study. I had an example at NSF where I looked at the data that we collected, and the early interviews were about an hour, and the later interviews are getting down to about 40 minutes. And so when I started listening to the interviews, I heard this young, inexperienced interviewer going, "Well, people have told me this. Is that the way you feel about it?" And people go, "Well, yeah, that's right." And that wasn't what we wanted, So that was a case of where I should have done a little more training of the interviewer. Okay, this next one, statistical regression. I think this is always the hardest one for people to understand. They also call it regression to the mean. I don't think that helps any. But this is the idea if someone scores high on a test, then they're likely to score lower the next time they take the test. So we talked about the blood pressure thing. And so the way this can affect research is you've taken people because they scored high on the test, and then you've taken people because they scored low on the test, and now you're researching with them. Well, they're going to go to the mean. They could have been high because they just had a good day, and they could have been low because they had a bad day. So that's why you don't want to pick people based on a score to a test. Okay, selection. Now, the gold standard of selection is random assignment. We can't necessarily do that, especially when we're dealing with people. So, it's just not always practical. But there are other ways that you can do selection so that it's not so biased. So we hope for that. One of the examples, I'm sure you've all been to a hotel and had the little, survey that you're supposed to fill out and tell them how you like the hotel. Well, I got to tell you, the people who fill those surveys out, either they're really happy or they're really upset. We have very few people that have, kind of moderate opinions about hotels that are filling those surveys out. At least that's what, as a survey researcher, that would be my idea. Okay, mortality. This is my favorite name of all the threats to validity, mortality. You can lose your subjects during the research. They move out of the area, they lose interest in the research, don't want to be part of it anymore, or they could die. And this can be a problem with some of the medical research. They were doing a study of Aricept, a drug that's used to treat Alzheimer's patients. And after about a year, they had too many people that had died to be able to continue with the research. And the really sad thing about this to me is that the doctors only prescribe the drug for a year because that's the amount of time they can prove it's effective. But it could be that it's effective for the second year for the patient because they don't know they don't prescribe it for the second year. And that's just a shame. There's a panel of doctoral recipients at the National Science Foundation, and they take people when they first get their doctorate degrees and they follow them their entire career. And some of those people, as you could imagine, don't want to be in the study anymore. And I thought it was kind of funny because one person called up and said, I'm so sorry, I'm just, I think they were in their 70s, and they said, I just don't want to be part of this anymore. I've been doing this for a long time, and I hope I've helped you out, but I just don't want to be part of it anymore. What they didn't know was that I think at age 75 or something, they actually stopped sending you the questionnaires. You're not part of the study anymore, and they were going to be 75, and so they weren't going to get another one anyway. But we thanked them very graciously. Thank you so much. That's okay. You don't need to worry about filling it out anymore. Okay, and then I put the et cetera threat, which is some of these things interact with each other. Selection and maturation can interact and so forth. And Campbell and Stanley just want to remind us about this, so that's that one. Okay, so now we're going to talk about threats to external validity. The threats to the external validity again include testing, and they include selection, because those can be threats to external as well as internal validity. And then the next two threats we're going to talk about. So the third threat to external validity is experimental arrangements. And this is known as the Hawthorne effect. How many of you have heard of the Hawthorne effect? Okay, so this was something that happened in 1924 to 1932. They did 7 studies at the Hawthorne plant in Chicago. This was where Western Electric Company manufactured some equipment for the Bell Telephone Company. And they were measuring productivity, and the women that did the work did inspection of parts and assembling of parts. So the legend, the lore of the Hawthorne effect is that they turned up the lights to see if the women would be more productive, and they worked harder. And then they turned the lights back down, and the women worked still harder. So the idea is that you're not really, that they weren't responding to the lights. They were responding to the observers that were sitting down and writing up everything that they did. I found this 1974 article which said that it may not have been exactly that, but we don't care. We love the name the Hawthorne effect, and we're going to keep using it. So anyway, this refers to the experimental setting being artificial and not necessarily being predictive of real life. Okay, the fourth external validity threat is multiple treatment interference. And this is where the research subjects are measured several times, and it could negatively affect the accuracy of the measurement as they learn the research. Now, my favorite example of this is the Nielsen TV ratings. They send people diaries to fill out and say what they watch on TV, and after you fill them out, you made sure and watched your favorite program the first week so you could put it down in the diary. Well, by the third week, you forgot to watch your favorite program, but that it's really important that it get high ratings, so you write it down in the diary anyway. So you're sort of learning the test over time and realizing that maybe you ought to change it a little bit. And then the other thing is just the fatigue of being in research, that this, when you've got multiple treatments, that can be a problem. And I think even when you're asking people a series of questions in a questionnaire, that there can be a fatigue factor, because you're asking them the same the same categories for a bunch of questions, and by the time they get to the second half of the questions, they're really not thinking about the distinctions anymore. Okay, now I'd like to do a little practice with identification and see how using these threats to validity is, see how much you've learned, see what we can do with some of these. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over this study and tell you a little bit more about it, and then we'll get some questions going on it. Okay, so this is my survey suggests Arlingtonians like pricey nuptials from the Sun Gazette. Okay, the average cost of a wedding in Arlington, Virginia, according to this study, is about $48,000 based on a survey of wedding couples. And these weddings cost about 47% of the median income of Arlington County residents. And so therefore, Arlington County is a great place to get married because it ranks 4th lowest nationally in terms of how much you're paying for the wedding compared to how much the household income might be. Okay, and the average wedding nationally is $37,000, well actually $38,000. And Loudoun County costs even more than Arlington. Remember Arlington, let's go back, Arlington's $48,000, Loudoun's $51,000, Fairfax is $49,000. And I think Loudoun and Fairfax were even better than Arlington in the national ratings in terms of relatively cheap to have a wedding here. But I think the Sun Gazette got the headline right, that the weddings are pricey in Arlington because the national average is $37,000 and we're close to $48,000. Okay. So the source of the data for this study were something called the Wedding Report. They also, just for your information, Brooks County, Texas was the worst one in the nation. They spend 161% of their median household income for weddings because their median household income is only $21,000 compared to over $100,000 in Arlington. So if you remember that the national wedding was about $38,000, then their weddings aren't that much cheaper in Texas. Okay, so and I just wanted to point out that 5 of the 10 most affordable counties for weddings, supposedly, are in Virginia. So they collected data in 2013 from 3,700 survey samples. I assume this means couples, I'm not really sure. And they did wedding costs for 55 products, everything down to save the date cards. And the surveys were, quote, random and anonymous, although I couldn't find out what that meant. And they had two types of couples surveyed before the wedding and after the wedding. Okay, so what problems do you see with these methods? Do you trust their data? Okay, why not?
Well, my nose for numbers tells me that the numbers are much too high.
Yeah.
And
For Arlington?
no, for anywhere.
Oh, okay. You don't believe people spend $38,000 on a wedding, or?
In Manhattan or Marin County, yes.
Okay.
But I don't think people are that crazy here.
Okay.
And so, what I'm wondering is, did they find the people by going to wedding management or wedding planning days? That's my first question.
Okay.
And if they did, the fact that people are using professional planners and managers already means that they're really looking to do a lot and not too worried about cost.
Okay.
So that would be my first question.
All right, so you think these numbers are probably too high because the way they got the couples was probably through people who are spending more money.
Surveying the most affluent.
I bet they are. I bet they are. That's a very good point. Okay, someone else?
Mine was under $100.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? Not your price of your wedding, but about the study. Yes?
If you have pre-wedding data, that's just an anticipated cost. You don't know that you'll actually spend that money.
Right, and we don't know a whole lot about how they actually, did that. Okay, and maybe they did before and after with the same couples, and they just didn't. Not everybody responded both times.
Implication that they used the 55 products, but that may not be the case.
That's true too. Okay, someone back here.
That just, the fact that somebody would spend about $30,000, $40,000 isn't to me, it isn't very representative of most people.
Okay.
And if you go to these wedding planners.
Okay, now I will say in defense of the study that if you talk about relative, cost, if you're trying, I think the Sun Gazette still got it right, that, if these people are all people who spend lots on their wedding, Arlington weddings are cheaper than you might expect. Anything else though? You're missing the best one of all. Someone else? Well, 3,700 people nationwide. How many people did they really get in Arlington County?
Maybe one.
I don't know.
Because there are about that many, there are something on that order of many counties in the United States.
Yeah, so they did a lot of estimation. So they got a lot of economists involved in this project, trying to make estimates based on Arlington County from the demographic data. And the other thing, as a survey researcher, I got to tell you, I'd like to see the questionnaire. I can't believe that people really were diligent about, filling out 55 products, and I don't know what other kind of questions they ask them. I really like to know more about it. And I thought at this point in the talk, if we have some time, and I think we do, I wanted to give you an example of asking survey questions from World War II. This is an oldie moldy, but I still like it a lot. And they were about, I don't think, 4 or 5 organizations that ask about whether we should get involved in the war. This is before Pearl Harbor. Should we get involved in the war in Europe? And so here's the 2 questions. Some people say that if the United States goes on helping England, Germany may start a war against our country. Do you think we should continue to help England even if we run this risk? Okay, and then the second way of asking this with a different poll was, should the United States go to war now and send an army to Europe? Now, one of these got 8% saying yes, and the other one got 76% saying yes. Which is which?
The first one, 76.
Yeah, the first one, 76. We're already involved with England. Let's keep going. Don't you agree with that? So surveys, can have real problems, and maybe some other time I'll come and talk to you more about surveys. All right, let's go ahead. Before I go to the next section, we've talked about experiments, experimental kind of data that's being collected and the threats to the validity, and we sort of, just talked a teeny bit about placebos in there with the Tylenol experiment. But I do want to tell you that the word on the street is that placebos are often better than control groups with no treatment. If you go on the internet and try to find research that proves this, it's not easy. The only thing I could really find was this 2010 study where they gave people sugar pills. And they told them that it had no medical benefit whatsoever, and it turned out it still improved their irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. So we know there's at least one study out there that shows that placebos work. And then I found another one that some undergrads at Dartmouth might have done because it's in the Dartmouth undergrad journal. And they also did a survey where they gave some of the people placebos, and they told them it was a placebo, and it was for their migraine headache, and their headaches improved, as well as the people who were told they were taking the migraine medicine, and they really got a placebo. So they were able to do a little bit of that. But
how does that jive with your earlier one where you said that with or without the placebo, they got better with time?
well, I'm just saying you need control groups for that, right? So anyway, what I want to tell you is there is a lot of interest right now in studying the placebo effect, about whether people actually improve with placebos or not, and whether we can harness that power some other way. And so that I've got a copy. I don't know if any of you get Discover Magazine, but if you've still got your August issue, there's a wonderful article in there. It's called The Healing Power of Placebos. And they actually, did some brain stuff where they were able to show that dopamine released with placebos, did some different things in the body, that there really may be a placebo effect. So anyway, stay tuned for that. I think that's fascinating stuff. Okay, now I'd like to switch gears and talk about another tool for evaluating research that was developed at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. It's called the Dimensions of Quality. And this is a tool to help GAO plan defensible, useful studies, but I also think that these dimensions of quality are really helpful for us to evaluate research. And I've got kind of a fun example for us to use. I'll mention I worked at GAO for 17 years as a survey researcher, so this may not be objective, but okay. So here's the dimensions of quality: accuracy, objectivity, fairness, context, sophistication, scope, completeness, significance, value, timeliness, and clarity. And of course, we'll go through those. Okay, so I decided at this point in the talk I'm probably going to be running behind, so maybe I better not do all of these together. I think we're doing fine on time. But these are the ones that are obviously important when you're designing research: accuracy, objectivity, timeliness, clarity. I mean, it's pretty obvious what those are, what they represent. Is 2002, is that study out of date? Do we really trust the data from that? These are the kinds of things whenever you're looking at research. Objectivity, who did the sponsorship? Did they really do a good job of it? I don't know. So, and in fact, we'll talk a little bit about that more on the next slide. Okay, context sophistication. This is the phrase that I really like. I think that Nancy Kingsbury, who put together these dimensions of quality at GAO with a committee, that maybe this came out of the evaluation research literature. I'm not really familiar enough with that literature, but I really like this phrase. So that's putting the research in the context of other research. Do they have a relevant literature review? Do they have caveats to the finding? Who is the sponsor, and do you really trust it? And so I thought it might be kind of fun to read you a little research glib. This is the Week magazine. Every week they have health and science, one-page thing. They've got the health scare of the week. So let's hear about the health scare of the week. Hand dryers spread bacteria. Next time you use a hand dryer in a public restroom, be warned. You may be dousing yourself with bacteria. Now what they did is they took some gloves and they doused them in bacteria. I don't know before or after they put them on the hands of the research subjects, but they had these gloves on that had lots of bacteria on them. And then they took the gloves off and they went and they washed their hands. And then a third of them used paper towels to dry their hands. A third of them used the jet dryers, those accelerator things that are really, and a third of them used the regular dryers that don't, the ones that takes forever to get your hands dry. Okay. Yeah. Everybody's familiar with those. Okay, so you know about the three treatments. That's very familiar. And they found that the germ counts near the jet dryers were 4.5 times higher than those near the warm air dryers. And they were 27 times higher than the paper towel dryers. So what they did is they measured an area around where the paper towels were and around where the jet dryers were and so forth. And researcher Mark Wilcox from the University of Leeds Leeds University in England, who did this study, he quoted, he said, well, if you use an electric hand dryer, quote, you may be splattered with bugs from other people's hands, unquote. Now, this is the part I love about the week. Here's the last sentence in the article. Dyson, a producer of jet air dryers, says the study used unrealistically high levels of bacteria and was funded by the paper towel industry. That was great. So do we believe this study? Probably not. Probably not. And also that whole thing about, I thought they were washing their hands, you know, so why are they dousing their hands with bacteria? Isn't the soap supposed to clean the bacteria? I don't get this whole thing, but once you find out the paper towel people did it. Okay, let's go on to the next dimension of quality that we're going to cover. Does the study look at relevant issues? Does the methodology give you enough details? And then there's the standard of reproducibility. Could anyone else do this research and get the same results? You know, they for one thing, they need to have enough details of how they did the research, like with that wedding thing. They needed to have enough details so I could see if I did this study, would I get those same results or would I do it a little bit differently? And they really didn't do that. They just claimed proprietarity. And I said theoretically that there are enough details of the research that you could do it again. You're not necessarily going to do it again, but you'd like to know what's going on there. Okay, let's look at the next one, and then we've got a really fun example. Significance and value. Now, there's two kinds of significance. There's statistical significance, and you know, this is the thing with the polls. You know, they tell you that so-and-so's running 4 points ahead of their opponent in the election, but there's a 5% sampling error. So it really means statistically they're tied, and this is a thing that I think the newspapers are getting a little better about that. You know, but still something to watch out for. And then there's the practical significance. What is the value of the finding anyway? Let's see. So Arlington wedding prices are some of the highest in the nation. You know, okay, so what are you going to do with that? What's the practical value? And then the other thing is if they did the study with college students, do you really care what college students do anyway? All right, so next, what I'd like to do, and this is going to be so much fun, is use an example where we're going to look at the quality of research on a very important topic, which is the design of the American flag. Now, how many of you think that Betsy Ross designed the flag, right? or even sewed the first flag? Raise your hand. How many? Okay. She either designed the flag and or she sewed it, but she was involved in the first American flag. Okay, 2 of you. Okay. 3. Okay, good. How many of you have ever heard of Francis Hopkinson? My husband and my good friend Earl Williams, who actually is behind my idea for the example today. Okay. All right, so who designed the flag, Betsy Ross or Francis Hopkinson? We're going to look at the evidence, and we're going to use the dimensions of quality and see which one we believe, okay? Here we go. Okay, Betsy Ross evidence. What is the evidence that Betsy Ross designed the flag? You may not know this, but the basic evidence for Betsy Ross is oral tradition, which is testimonial evidence. So that's kind of like the witness on the stand, testifying to what happened. These affidavits of her descendants were not done until 1870. She died in 1836. So it's quite a bit after she had died before they actually wrote down, what they knew of her story. And in fact, in 1909, some more relatives came out of the woodwork, and they also gave affidavits, testifying as to how this wonderful story about Betsy Ross. And the story is wonderful. George Washington was part of a committee of the Continental Congress to design the flag. He came to her home. He discussed with her how to design the flag. She suggested, this is all in the affidavits, she suggested 5-pointed stars rather than 6-pointed. She showed him how with one snip of the scissors she could make a 5-pointed star. It named, the affidavits named the other 2 people with George Washington. But the trouble is there's no evidence in any of George Washington's diaries that he ever even knew of Betsy Ross, or that much less that he was visited her home. And there's also no evidence that he was a member of any kind of committee to design the flag. There's no data in any of the documents for the Continental Congress on a flag committee. Okay, so that's the Betsy Ross evidence. What is the Francis Hopkinson evidence? Anything better? Well, there's what we call documentary evidence. There's correspondence between Francis Hopkinson and the Continental Congress in 1780. And this was also, what he did is he asked the Congress to pay him for the flag. In the first letter, he asked for a cask of wine, which I thought was kind of a joke, but it turns out back then that was probably less subject to inflation than money. But Congress wrote him back and said, no, sorry, you've got to, you got to ask for money. So he asked for some money, and I think the amount, or was it $7,200, right? So $7,200 to the flag, and there was actually a report done that was sent to the Auditor General supporting that he should be paid for the flag. But then later somebody decided he'd been a government employee, done this on government time, so he couldn't get the money after all. But these things are available, for you to see. And okay, then there was also, so this stuff was going on in 1780, and then in 1926, a young man who had done his dissertation on Francis Hopkinson turned it into a lovely biography, which is too bad it's out of print, but that's some other evidence of all the details of what happened. Okay, all right, so let's look at the oral tradition of Betsy Ross and the dimensions of quality. So the significance and the value of, what the practical value of the story. It's great. It's a wonderful story. The context sophistication is very high. They've got all the details in there. In fact, the family even located a 5-pointed star that had been folded in a Quaker safe someplace. And so they brought this forward to, try and say that this is also evidence. The clarity of the story, it's just beautiful. There have been paintings that have been done showing Betsy Ross with George Washington. There's a lot of stuff going on there with the oral tradition that's really great. But what is the accuracy of any of it? We don't really know. And what is the objectivity when the descendants were the ones who came up with the... Okay, so, and what is the scope and completeness, of the data? There's just these affidavits. There's not a whole lot else to that. And what is the timeliness? If this stuff didn't come out until 1870, not too timely. Okay. Okay, documentary evidence, and I should make the disclaimer that I'm a big Hopkinson fan, so I'm probably not too unbiased standing up here, but what is the accuracy of Hopkinson's claim? We don't really know. Just because he asked to be paid for the flag doesn't say that he did it, right? I can't say that that's accurate either, but what I can say are some other dimensions of quality that I think make up for that. What was the timeliness? It was great, because it happened about the time the flag, we came out with the flag law and everything like that. The biography was a little too late, in terms to be timely. Okay. The significance and value, high. Context sophistication, high. Some of these things were high for Betsy Ross, too. The objectivity and fairness, though, that was high because they had the Auditor Generals, had this report that said somebody else besides Francis Hopkinson said he ought to be paid for it. And the scope and completeness, I rank as yes, and the clarity is yes. Okay, what do we conclude? Based on the evidence, historians believe that Hopkinson is the true designer of the U.S. flag. Based on popular belief, U.S. citizens today still believe that Betsy Ross designed the flag, or at least sewed it, because everybody loves a good story.
Well, that's what's in there.
Okay, now I'd like to go back to the health. Okay, patients' depression improved 10 to 20% with meditation. And this was a result comparable with the use of antidepressants. And I think I actually had a little more information on that study as well. 15 participants who had normal levels of anxiety and no history of anxiety orders or no history of meditation practice for that matter were involved. They had 4 20-minute sessions on mindfulness meditation. So they did the meditation. They did MRIs before and after the meditation. The brain activity that they found in the MRIs, they concluded was consistent with decreased anxiety and decreased worrying. And most participants reported that their anxiety had decreased by as much as 39%. So I guess they had something for the people to fill out to say. Okay, how would you evaluate this research? Now that we've learned how to do that, we've got the dimensions of quality, the threats to validity.
I don't like expressions like as much as.
I don't either. Good. I'm glad you pointed that out, because you didn't, I was going to. Okay?
Nobody's going to report 39. That's a ridiculously precise number.
True. Although we had a friend that used to do that on purpose to get people to believe him. But okay, anything else? What's good about this? What's good about this study? I mean, we've only talked about bad things. I think there's a couple good things about this one.
Seems plausible.
Well, Okay, why? Why?
Well, because a number of other studies besides this one were done.
No, just talk about this study. Let's just talk about this study. What's plausible? You see these?
Working the mind, and you're focusing on a certain activity.
Well, okay, so you think it sounds good. But what about the study? What makes you believe the study? What makes you say this was a good study or bad study? The MRIs. Absolutely, the MRIs. Huh? We think they're objective, yes. We haven't learned yet that they're not, but yes, this seems to be objective measure. What's the other thing that they did?
The point is then the conclusion from his brain activity was consistent with that is so vague.
Well, I didn't really put all the details on here. So
Presumably normal people, normal levels of anxiety, no history of disorders.
Yeah. They started with people who didn't know about meditation and trained them so they all had kind of the same level of
yes,
experience.
yes. And there's something else here that I really liked, and that's that they have multiple measures. So the first time they did the meditation, maybe they hadn't quite figured out how to do it yet. But by the time they'd done the fourth session, I would think that the MRIs for that session were probably the ones I would trust the most. So I like that. And also it was what I call multiple measures, is that they didn't just ask people about their anxiety, they had the MRI too. So that was really good.
Remember your talk about repeated tests, though, and like the blood pressure getting better on repetition?
But in that case, this would.
Could have had a little
15
effect
seems
like that.
like too small a number.
It is too.
Yeah, I got to tell you though, these medical studies, that's what they do is about 15. And I don't know if you know, like with the clinical trials, on purpose, the first clinical trial was a very small number of people in case it kills somebody. And then they go on to bigger numbers as they go through the 4 sets of clinical trials.
I don't know, Hopkinson, there was no control group.
Right. Right.
The first time I did an MRI, it was noisy, it frayed my nerves a bit, but if I did it over and over, I might get accustomed to it and I'd react to it strongly. So it could be that what they were measuring was increasing comfort with an MRI test.
What if they just had the people sit there and read a fairy tale for 20 minutes? It would have been nice to have some kind of control group. It would have, it would have been very, very nice. So stay tuned for more research in this area, hopefully with some control groups. Okay. All right, last comments before we open up for questions. Why is Fran here today? I'm here because I really believe this stuff. I've been saying for the last 10 years I was going to write a book on it, to try and get this out and so that everybody knows these little tools that help us so much in looking at the research that we read in the newspaper or hear on TV or whatever. So what are the takeaways that I want you most to remember today of all the stuff that we've been through? Okay, I want you to look for who is the sponsor. I want you to look for whether they have a comparison group, and I want you to look for the selection. Is it unbiased, if not random? Those are the 3 most important things to take away today. If you have room in your brain to remember some more stuff, look for replication. Are there other studies that are supporting the same findings? Look, could this study be reproduced, or is it just one of these weird things that happened once and it's never going to happen again? Look for multiple methods. Do they have case studies, lab results, diaries, analysis of known data sets? How many different things are they doing that all agree? And they're doing some wonderful work right now looking at gut bacteria and heart disease. And they're doing mice, they're doing people, they're doing food diaries, they had one guy who was a vegetarian, eating the meat and just looking at him. But they got the other stuff, to sort of put all these things together to say, is it the meat that's causing the heart disease, or is the gut bacteria that's produced from the meat? So stay tuned for more stuff on that too. It's really exciting. Context sophistication, that's another thing I'm hoping you can remember. It's they got the right stuff in there.
Could you explain context sophistication just a little bit more?
Okay, what is the context in the research? And are you being sophisticated about it? Are you looking at the relevant literature? Are you looking at the sponsorship is actually part of context sophistication. Are you looking at, what are the caveats? The caveats are really important in looking at a piece of research, and if the researcher didn't put any caveats in there, they don't have a lot of context sophistication. They really need to have that in there. So it's sort of looking at the whole big plate of things. I'm sure all of you, some of you have heard the example about the storks, the spurious correlation. Storks come in the spring, babies are born in the spring. I guess those storks brought those babies, but it's not. And that's another thing with context sophistication. What are the, alternative hypotheses? Okay, so your homework. We had tests today, we had, participation. What is your homework? There's a great book. I'm sorry it's out of print, but it's so wonderful, and I think you can get it on bookfinder.com very easily for cheap. It's called Rival Hypotheses by Schuler Huck, and what he does is the first half of the book, he has these little page-and-a-half descriptions of some research, and then in the back of the book, he's got a paragraph that tell you what the threats for that research were. And it's just so much fun to read. It's really great practice. The other thing is find yourself some news sources that do study caveats. The Washington Post has that little thing every week in the health section where they sort of, here's some new stuff in health research, and they always have the caveats there. That's really wonderful. And then this third piece of homework, I think for this group, this should be pretty easy, is just to be very skeptical of everything you read. Okay, thanks for listening today.